I'm just going to focus in on the guys that you'd consider starting this week. So, of course, we're going to skip by the first two tiers with Barkley, Henry, Brees, St. Brown, Chase, Tyreek, Mixon, Lamb, A.J. Brown, Walker, Bijan, Gibbs, London, Mason, Kamara, H.N. Taylor. If you wanted to go to the comment section and go, oh my God, I can't believe he has H.N. ranked up better, you can argue with the wall. These are guys that you should start no matter what. Going down to tier 3, this is where maybe you start having some conversations, but in most leagues, you will start them, of course. Josh Jacobs with Jacobs. Beautiful matchup going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Super high total here where you actually should have a 27-point implied team total for the Green Bay Packers. This puts them as the second highest offense with the projections this week. And Jacobs is consistently seeing 20-plus opportunities a game in this offense. Has a role as a receiver. Definitely want to be starting him. Going over to our next name, we are going to be looking at David Montgomery. Now, obviously, David Montgomery was a sell-high candidate for us last week, coming off a monstrous performance against the Dallas Cowboys. But I still stand by. David Montgomery is a low-end RB1 every week. David Montgomery is a high-end RB2, especially in this matchup where you're going up against the Tennessee Titans. Because if you actually look at this, right now, you have the Detroit Lions projecting out to be the best offense in the NFL in Week 8. Not only the best offense, but at the same time, you have a spread of 11.5 points in this game. So it's a very clear spot that they're going to be able to run the ball over and over and over again in the second half. It'll be a great bounce back game for Montgomery. I'm going over to Stefon Diggs. I understand Stefon Diggs, very disappointing last week with only 23 receiving yards. However, this is going to be a little bit of a different story. There's no way that we see only 83 passing yards again for CJ Stroud. If you go over to Underdog and look at the CJ Stroud projection, right now Stroud is higher, lower, 240.5 passing yards. If we assume that Diggs can see 25 to 30% of this offense, I think that puts Stefon Diggs in a very comfortable spot to be a low-end wide receiver 1. Now, of course, I do want to mention that the Texans, last time they played the Colts, just ran the ball over and over and over again. But with that being said, the last time they played the Colts, Stefon Diggs did score 22 fantasy points in a game with Nico Collins in it. Now, our next option will be Malik Neighbors. Now, I completely understand that Neighbors seems like he is incredibly low here. The issue is if you are looking at sportsbooks at the moment, you have an implied team total of 15 points. 15 points for this Giants offense. This should be the worst offense in the NFL. You have a brutal matchup going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Malik Neighbors was leading the NFL in targets per game through the first 4 weeks and still probably is. I mean, hell, you've seen 7 targets, 18 targets, 12 targets, 15 targets, and 8 targets in the games that he has played. So despite this being the worst offense in the league this week, despite this being a garbage matchup, you still need to start him. And you also need to take the Malik Neighbors higher than half a total yard for Monday night. And yes, I actually hooked y'all up with that, regardless of if you've been on Underdog with us for 3 years now with code FLOCK or 2 years or 1 year, whether you signed up yesterday, today, or tomorrow, you're going to be getting that free Malik Neighbors pick more than less than half a total yard for the Monday night game. And that's exclusive to code FLOCK users. Also, if you go ahead and use promo code FLOCK on Underdog, you're going to get an additional free Dak Prescott pick, more than less than half a total yard for Sunday night, plus a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000, plus a free team review in the live stream that we're doing every single day as well. So make sure you take advantage of that if you have not done so already. Now, moving over to our next name, we are going to be looking at T. Higgins. T. Higgins is in a much better offense than what we are going to see with Neighbors. The issue is, obviously, you have Jamar Chase. But still, over the past month, we've actually seen T. Higgins close in on 10 targets a game. Over the past month, he's had 3 touchdowns. He's been very consistent with 83, 77, and 82 receiving yards as well. This is a game against the Philadelphia Eagles where we'd actually assume that Cincinnati has to throw the ball with aggression in the second half. This should be a higher scoring contest in general. So I think Higgins must start player. Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams will also be 2 guys that I think you kind of have to get in. This past week, both players had 9 targets. While yes, Davante Adams only gave you 6 fantasy points, it was the first game in New York. And main thing that I'm looking at, sportsbooks are projecting out a massive bounce back for this Jets offense. The Jets are currently 7-point favorites over the New England Patriots with an implied team total of 24.25 points. If you look at the underdog pick'ems that you have for this Jets receiver core right now, Garrett Wilson's actually higher, lower, 53.5 receiving yards. Devontae Adams is higher, lower, 56.5 receiving yards. So underdog's actually projecting Adams to be the guy over Wilson. I'm just going to go with the younger ascending player instead, my personal preference. Deebo Samuel, if we knew he was 100% healthy, it'd be way higher in these rankings. I was operating under the assumption with Deebo Samuel being hospitalized at the beginning of the week that Samuel wasn't going to be playing in week 8. However, Shanahan came out on Wednesday and said, oh no, Deebo Samuel can play on Sunday night. Then you got Deebo Samuel at practice on Thursday. Now the issue is, of course, that Deebo Samuel plays on Sunday night. So I know that we want to go through and we want to be putting Deebo Samuel into our lineup if he is good to go. But what happens if Deebo Samuel is a game time decision? You don't have a backup option to pivot over to. And instead you're looking at it going, oh my gosh, do I have to play Chuba Hubbard in the flex spot early, or am I going to go Deebo Samuel? So we should get a lot more information on Friday. We should get a lot more information on Saturday. I'm recording this super late Thursday night. And of course, I'll be updating the rankings over on flogfantasy.com. I'll be updating the rankings, I guess, in the live streams on Sunday as well. So just make sure you're subscribed or you go over and check them out on the site. Now, I cannot wait to start Javonte Williams in the Flock League this week. We started him against the New Orleans Saints. He comes through with the 26 fantasy points. And most weeks, I would not want to start Javonte. However, it is insane to see this. The Denver Broncos are projected with an implied team total of 26 points. The only offenses that are projected to score more points than Denver are going to be the Lions, the Packers, the Ravens. Denver is 10.5-point favorites here over the Carolina Panthers. The only game that has a larger spread will be the Detroit Lions and Tennessee Titans. So this is the perfect spot to jam in Javonte Williams. Expect a massive performance. You've had the consistent workload as a receiver. You've had him closing in on 15 to 20 opportunities in most weeks. Now, most weeks, it's not going to be nearly as good of a game environment as this, but Javonte is a must-start guy this week. And depending on how well he performs, you could potentially look to sell him for, a really nice premium the week after. Now, James Cook will be our next player. With James Cook, disappointing with only 12 carries, 32 rushing yards this past week with nothing as a receiver. But it was a game that he was coming back from an injury. You potentially are in a situation in which Ray Davis gets scaled back. We see more and more James Cook. Keep in mind, it wasn't a close game against the Tennessee Titans, whereas this could be a very close contest against the Seattle Seahawks. I believe the spread's only 3 points. And we had seen at the beginning of the year, James Cook not only have the red zone usage, but at the same time, him have a receiving role as well. Now, Amari Cooper will be our next play. Now, Amari was somebody that we weren't excited about in week 7, just saying, oh, okay, may only play 30, 40% of the snaps. He actually only played 35%. Now, this week, I'm expecting that Amari Cooper plays significantly more. It's a good matchup against the Seattle Seahawks as well, in that we could expect that the Buffalo Bills have to throw the ball in the second half. Amari Cooper right now is higher, lower, 55.5 receiving yards on Underdog. I think he's a very safe play. Our next option will be Brian Thomas Jr. With Brian Thomas Jr., he just prints 20-point weeks. Over the past month, you've had at least 3 20-point games. You've had 1 disappointing contest and a tough matchup against the Chicago Bears. Now, the issue is this is a tougher matchup against the Green Bay Packers. We actually just saw this Packers team go through and shut down the passing volume in Houston. But with that being said, this is a game in which the Jags are 4.5, 5.5 point dogs. They are probably going to have to throw the ball in the second half. Brian Thomas Jr. looks like he's ascending to be one of the best wide receivers in the NFL already. Super excited about this dude. Must start name every single week. Jaden Reed will be a must start name here as well. Now, the issue with Jaden Reed, obviously, is the target volume is not nearly as consistent. Reed is averaging fewer than 6 targets a game so far this season. So, when he comes out and he has the massive spike weeks with 27 fantasy points, 33 fantasy points, don't be surprised if the next week we possibly have him on a sell high video. We may or may not have done that. But also, when he comes out and he disappoints with the 3 fantasy point game, I'm going to be the first person to tell you, hey, this is what you're signing up for, right? You're going to get the big time spikes, the really low performances as well, where the volume's not there. You're relying on efficiency. Now, the thing is, this Packers offense is one of the best offenses in the NFL. It's a great matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So with Reed, never think like, oh my gosh, he's the top 6 wide receiver rest of season. But also don't think like this is somebody you're ever considering benching, at least from what we've had so far this year. I think you have to get him in your lineup. J.K. Dobbins will be our next name. With Dobbins, I understand that we didn't see the type of volume that we wanted last week, but realistically speaking, this is a phenomenal matchup that we have here going up against the New Orleans Saints. We just saw Javonte run all over the Saints. At the same time, this is a spread where I believe you have the Saints as 7.5 point dogs. So more likely than not, you actually have the Los Angeles Chargers with the ability to establish the run, which is obviously what they want to do. DeAndre Swift will be our next back now. With Swift, this is a quick side note. Obviously, you want to start him against Washington. I mean, the man has been just going out there seeing 20-plus opportunities a game. It has been phenomenal, and I'm starting him in the Flock League. I'm freaking pumped. I mean, the man has the target volume as well, but with all that being said, I think you start Swift this week, you start Swift next week, and maybe even the week after. But before your trade deadline, I would recommend possibly throwing him on the block because late in the season, you'll have a stretch of games against the Packers, the Vikings, the Lions, the Niners, the Vikings, and the Lions. It is going to be a 6-game stretch where we want nothing to do with DeAndre Swift. Now this week, sign me up for all the Swift, 3 straight games with over 20 fantasy points. I'm going to start him this week, and I'm assuming nobody in the Flock League is watching this because I'll probably try to sell him in a couple weeks. DJ Moore will be our next guy. I mean, if you are looking at DJ Moore, the thing is, obviously, there are just so many receivers in this offense. You have Keenan, you have Komet seeing volume, and at the same time, Rome Odunze could possibly expand his role coming out of the bye, but it's a good matchup against Washington. DJ Moore is the wide receiver 1 in this, and Caleb Williams has continued to improve every single week of his career. And now Jalen Waddle will be our next name. I mean, I have seen a lot of people in the live streams. Y'all know we're answering questions of the stream every single night, coming out and acting as if they were going to bench Jalen Waddle. I need us all to be on the same page. Yes, Jalen Waddle has not had a single game with 10 fantasy points since week 1. Yes, it has been disgusting. But if you're looking at this now, the Miami Dolphins have an implied team total of 25 points, the same as what you get with the Bengals, and right behind the Bills, Chiefs, Texans. Tua's back in. This is yet again a phenomenal offense. This is somebody that you need to go through and you need to jam in, and I'm doing so with very little hesitation. Now, somebody else that people are going to push back on us here, that you need to start, and it's gross, but please make sure you get Rashad White in your lineup this week. Now, if you're looking at the projections that you have here with Tampa, obviously this offense is going to be much worse with no Mike Evans, much worse with no Chris Godwin. Right now, they have the same implied team total as the Cowboys, the Steelers, and the Cardinals. They are 2.5 point dogs to the Atlanta Falcons. But the thing is, Bucky Irving has been ruled out. You go back to this game against Baltimore, you get a 29-point freaking bomb from Rashad White. Obviously, the majority of this being from the 2 receiving touchdowns. But still, nonetheless, you should be really excited. You have the receiving role. You don't have Bucky to compete with. You're only competing with Sean Tucker. And I would imagine that you have a higher checkdown rate from Baker than usual, because when he goes through his progressions, and typically you would go, oh, is Godwin open? No. Is Evans open? Oh, no. Let me check the ball down. Now he's going to be asking, oh, is Sterling Shepard open? Oh, is Jalen McMillan open? I think the answers to those questions are going to be no, significantly more than they would have been with Evans and Godwin. I think you have more checkdowns for Rashad White. They probably try to run the ball a little bit more. With no Bucky, I think the workload is fine. Now, Tony Pollard will be our next name. Pollard, all the volume, horrible, horrible situation. I mean, going through and looking at the opportunities so far this season. 20 opportunities week 1, 23 in week 2, 10 in week 3, 24 in week 4. 20 in week 6, 22 in week 7. The man's averaging over 20 opportunities a game. Now, with that being said, you have no spears, so those opportunities are super safe. Now, the issue is you're in the Tennessee Titans offense. The only teams that project worse from a points total this week than the Titans are the Raiders, Panthers, and Giants. Not excited to start any of those players. And this is a game where you are 11.5-point dogs. So more likely than not, you are not going to see them able to run the ball at all against the Detroit Lions in the second half. Now, I think you still start Pollard, very similar to how you have to start Rashad White, because the man is going to have the receiving usage, and that does give him a really nice floor in a full PPR league. Now, going over to our next name, we're going to be looking at George Pickens. I'm sorry to say that Pickens is a sell-high player. I understand you get the 111 receiving yards, get the receiving touchdown. The best game of Pickens' I don't want to say entire career, but of his season so far. And I will also admit that, yes, of course, Russell Wilson being under center does help Pickens because this isn't going to be as rush first of an offense, and you will see a little bit more passing volume. But I do stand by. I don't necessarily think that we should expect 37 points a game going forward with Russell Wilson here in Pittsburgh. This game right now has an over-under of 36.5 points. Sportsbooks are putting this as by far and away the lowest scoring game in the NFL this week. Like, to go through and look at this, the next lowest scoring game is supposed to be the Saints-Chargers with an over-under of 40.5. So this is the exact opposite of what you would call a shootout. So I think Pickens probably not that excited to play him. I think something that does have the potential to shoot out will be Devonte Smith and the Philadelphia Eagles. Smith is somebody you have to start. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people got burned, including myself, by the 0.8 points last week. If we got a regular Devonte Smith game, I probably would have beat Sal in the Flock League. I'll be sitting here at 5-2, and I'd be doing a little happy song and dance in every single one of these videos this week. But that's not the situation. Instead, you only get 2 targets. Going back 2 weeks ago, you only see 4 targets. It was super disappointing, but they also played the Browns and the Giants. Here, now they're going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. I think you're actually probably going to have to see Jalen Hurts drop back a ton. I think you are going to have to see the passing volume go up in this offense. They're not going to be able to just force feed. 45 rushing attempts in this offense last week against the Giants. So I know Smith was bad. If you have a buy low opportunity on him, you go ahead and you take it. His higher lower on Underdog right now is 55.5 receiving yards. Now, Chuba Hubbard will be somebody that you have to play as well. Now, with Hubbard, he is in a garbage offense that projects to be the second worst offense in the NFL, only better than the Giants this week. You've seen the straight decline going from 28 to 22 to 17 to 15, then down to 17 points over the past 5 weeks. It's a tough matchup against Denver. This Denver defense limited Alvin Kamara last week. Now, obviously, you say, well, Mason, the Saints offense imploded. My thing is, you don't think that the Bryce Young Carolina Panthers can implode as well? Now, obviously, I'm assuming that Jonathan Brooks does not play this game. If Jonathan Brooks does play this game, I'm going to go through and I'm going to be moving Chuba Hubbard even lower. But I think this is probably the last week you get to start Chuba Hubbard because if Brooks is back next week, then at that point, you're going to be in a much, much worse spot. Now, going over to our next player, we will be looking at Jackson Smith-Njigba. Looking at JSN, this is the highest we've had him all season. And the reason being is we are operating under the assumption that you have no DK Metcalf. What's very interesting is if you look at the Underdog picks this week, they actually have Lockett as a better option over JSN. JSN's higher lower 52.5 receiving yards, whereas Tyler Lockett is going to be higher lower 59.5 receiving yards. My thought process with JSN is we have seen some of these nuclear games in terms of his opportunity. We're back in week 2. You actually had the 16 targets. In week 4, we had the 12 targets. In week 6, we've seen the 9 target game. So I think maybe at this point we have a little bit of a higher ceiling with JSN. But obviously, I think that both Seattle guys are startable this week in a matchup going up against Buffalo, where we've seen Seattle be willing to completely abandon the run and ask Geno Smith to drop back 50, 60 times when they're losing. Marvin Harrison Jr. will be our next guy with Harrison. It's been bad. There's no other way to put it. So I think you can completely ignore the game that you had against Green Bay. He played 14% of the snaps, left with a concussion. But outside of that, even if you go through and look at all the other performances that you've had from Harrison, 4 yards, 130 yards, 64 yards, 45 yards, 36 yards, and 21 yards. The issue is you look at the underlying volume that you've had from Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray is sitting with more games with fewer than 200 passing yards than games with more than 200 passing yards. So the passing volume's not here in this offense. Harrison is being treated as if he is an alpha wide receiver one if you're looking at opposing defenses. We've seen some nice target games from him. I still think he has upside in the second half of the year, but also at the same time, we haven't seen teams have a ton of passing volume against Miami so far this season. Chase Brown will be our next guy. With Chase Brown, super safe receiving role. I mean, going through over the past, say, 5 weeks, 3 targets, 3 targets, 3 targets, 3 targets, 2 targets. Kind of know what you're going to get there. Back-to-back weeks here also where you actually see him go for over 50% of the snaps. So he is the guy over Zach Moss at this point. I mean, over the past month, he is sitting here averaging about 15 points per game. Against the Philadelphia Eagles, this may be a game environment, however, where the Bengals do need to throw the ball a decent bit. And at the same time, it's not like Moss is a complete zero. While Chase Brown's definitely the guy, Moss still does have a role here. Now, Terry McLaurin will be our next wide receiver. I've seen a lot of people coming out into the stream saying, oh, Terry McLaurin's an elite receiver now. Isn't this great? Isn't this... Realistically speaking, Terry McLaurin's sitting here as the wide receiver 18 this season from a points per game perspective. He's been a very solid wide receiver too. I mean, over the past 5 weeks, he's been even better since we've had the full-blown Jaden Daniels breakout. Now, the thing is, if you're looking at this offense right now, you had no Jaden Daniels. And remember, I ranked Terry McLaurin as a top 10 wide receiver last week because sportsbooks were projecting out the Commanders at the very top of the NFL in total points scored, whereas now in a much tougher spot going up against the Chicago Bears with no Jaden Daniels, sportsbooks are now actually putting the Commanders with an implied team total of only 20.5 points. The only offenses that are supposed to be worse are the Colts, Browns, Patriots, Titans, Saints, Raiders, Panthers, Giants, and I'm not super excited about any of their receivers outside of Neighbors. Going down to our next tier, we're going to be looking at Zay Flowers. With Flowers, I just don't know how to rank him right now. The man misses practice on Wednesday, misses practice on Thursday, dealing with the ankle. You're going up against Cleveland. Even if he does play, you're probably not going to see a ton of pass attempts from Lamar here. So I would be conservative with Flowers for sure. I would probably rather plan on starting somebody else if you can, but Friday practice is massive. I mean, if he doesn't practice on Friday, which I'll let you know in the live stream tonight, then at that point, he would fall even further down these rankings. Now, Najee Harris will be our next play. If you are looking at Najee, people were giving us crap for ranking him, quote unquote, too high over the past 2 weeks. Now people are pissed that we're calling him a sell high candidate. The thing is, yes, he's had rushing touchdowns over the past 2 weeks. That's great. Yes, I think Russell Wilson's probably better for Najee because Russ isn't going to vulture as many rushing touchdowns as Fields would. But with that being said, Jaylen Warren's back. You look over the past 3 weeks, Najee Harris has had 5 targets. The previous 2 weeks with no Warren, he had 11 total. So the receiving usage has fallen off a cliff. He is now going to be a touchdown or bust running back. It's a good matchup going up against New York where they probably can run the ball in the second half. But I don't know. I mean, full PPR format, I'm less excited about Najee, which is what we make these rankings for. If you're playing in a non-PPR league, he flies ahead of a bunch of the receivers. Now, Tyler Lockett will be our next name. With Lockett, I think this is the first time we've ever had him ranked this high, at least this season, of course. He has yet to hit 20 fantasy points in a game. He's had one game with 15 or more points. But just a completely different scenario with no DK Metcalf. I think the target volume goes up dramatically. Wouldn't be surprised at all if this is the first week we get Tyler Lockett actually seeing double-digit targets. It's gross to start Tank Dell this high, right? It's gross to rank him this high. If you think that, oh, Mason, this is a clown ranking, Tank Dell is sitting here with, I mean, what? A game with 0 points this past week. What I'd recommend doing is just going and taking the lower than 62.5 total yards for Tank Dell on Underdog. Like Underdog right now is Tank Dell higher, lower 62.5 yards. Whereas you can go over and look at Brian Thomas and they have Brian Thomas higher, lower 56.5 yards. So I feel like we're already throwing enough hate on the Tank Dell side of this. But I mean, realistically speaking, you have no Nico Collins and it should be a much better passing offense. I think that we see Stroud actually see some volume in this offense. Now, our next option here will be Rico Dowd. Dowd has been used as a receiver. He's the clear starting back here in Dallas. The issue is this is a game environment in which you're going up against the Niners. It's a really brutal matchup. While at the same time, you are 4.5-point dogs, so you're probably not able to run the ball a ton in the second half. And we have seen historically Dak struggle against some of these top teams and top defenses. So not super excited to play Dowdle. I think it's a safe play. Darnell Mooney will be our next option. If you are looking at Darnell Mooney, yeah, we had him sell-high candidate after the 500 passing yard game for Cousins, effectively saying, oh, okay, if Cousins goes out there and throws for 300 or more passing yards, Mooney's going to be great. But he's consistently seeing you from like 20 to 22.5 to 25% of this team's passing volume. So if Cousins is only down there at 200 passing yards in a game, it's not going to be nearly as good of a situation. But here's specifically what you have this week. You are going up against a team that just gave up 5 passing touchdowns. Yes, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers just gave up 5 passing touchdowns. Not saying Cousins is going to have that, but I do think that there's an outside chance that you see a pretty big Cousins game. Somebody I know who's not going to have a big game will be Spencer Rattler. It's a tough matchup for Chris Olave. The benefit of Olave here is, yeah, you're in a spot in which I guess you don't have Shaheed. So if you don't have Shaheed, you're going to get volume for Olave in this offense. Now it's going to be volume in a very crappy offense, which is typically not exactly what we're wanting for receivers. Olave is going to fly up these rankings the second that we get Derek Carr back in. But it's a tough matchup with garbage quarterback play. Now going over to our next name, we'll be looking at Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb scores the touchdown this past week. He sees 3 targets, but ultimately Nick Chubb's not going to be catching the ball out of the backfields. He's going to see the efficiency dip based off the significant injuries coming off of, while at the same time, this does project consistently to be one of the worst offenses in the league. So not super excited about Chubb. Going over to Tracy. Tracy's a running back that looks like, yes, he's taken over as a starter here in New York. But with that being said as well, it's the worst offense in the league. You have a tough matchup against the Steelers. While Singletary is being erased, at the same time, it's not like Singletary is a complete zero. So I know a lot of people are excited about Tracy because any like rookie running back that's taking a job in the second half of the season, you typically say, oh yeah, that's great. The issue is if you're in the worst offense in the league with a team with a garbage quarterback, with an offensive line that's falling apart, I don't know how excited we can be realistically about you. Xavier Worthy will be our next candidate. I'm not really trying to figure out how DeAndre Hopkins is going to impact this the first weekend. Because I think base expectation is Hopkins only plays 30, even 35% of the snaps here in Kansas City. Worthy's coming off a career high 8 target performance against the Niners. It's a much better matchup against the Rams as well, where sportsbooks are saying that you will actually have a Chiefs bounce back, where the Chiefs have an implied team total of 25.5 points. Now, our next spot will be filled out with Ramondre Stevenson. Now, we're officially to the range where I would be really encouraging you, if you could, let's not start anybody here. Don't start anybody in this tier. Don't start anybody in the tier below. The reason I wouldn't want to start Stevenson is, sportsbooks are currently saying that the Patriots have an applied team total of 17.25 points. The only offenses that are supposed to be worse this week are the Titans, Saints, Raiders, Panthers, Giants. I know Drake May's exciting, but it's a brutal matchup going up against the Jets. And we have seen that New England is willing to just completely steer clear of Stevenson and turn this into a 3-man running back by committee if the game gets away from him. Now, our next option will be Alexander Mattison. Looking at Mattison, a massive role this past week. 3 straight games with double-digit fantasy points as well. The issue is, I believe the Kansas City Chiefs have allowed the fewest points to opposing running backs so far this season. You're playing in an offense that's barely projects to be better than the Panthers and Giants this week. You're in the worst matchup you could possibly ever ask for a running back. So I'm not excited. Our next 2 guys will be Tank Bigsby, Travis Etienne. I think you probably have to rank Bigsby over Etienne at this point with how good Bigsby looked last week. And obviously, I'll say I'm very biased. I've taken Bigsby in a ridiculous amount of underdog drafts. We are set to win a lot of money if Bigsby takes over this backfield. So maybe I'm rooting for Bigsby here, but realistically speaking, Etienne's been the guy with the receiving role. Etienne has the team investment, but obviously Etienne was already on thin ice going into the hamstring injury. It's a tough matchup. I'd rather not start either running back if Etienne's good to go. I'd rather not start Ladd McConkey. I have Ladd McConkey in the flock league. I'll probably bench him. I mean, you had over 300 passing yards finally for Justin Herbert in a game environment which you had no Quentin Johnston. Not only did you have no Quentin Johnston, but also you had no DJ Chark. So here looking at this, now if we have a receiver or two back in this offense and the passing volume comes down in Los Angeles and Ladd didn't even crack 10 fantasy points, I don't know how you trust them. Keenan Allen, yeah, he had 2 receiving touchdowns last week, but the man has had a total of 14 targets over the past 3 weeks. He's averaging fewer than 5 targets a game since he's come back from this injury. Christian Kirk going up against the Packers. The man sitting with 13 targets over the past 3 weeks. Romeo Dobbs should probably be higher in this list, to be honest with you. Because we look at this, Dobbs actually had the target volume where you're sitting with 22 targets over the past 3 weeks. Obviously, it's a much better offense than what we have with these other guys. So I'm going to update the rankings on the site, but it's honestly kind of clownish to have Romeo Dobbs this low. Realistically, I would start Dobbs over Kirk, Keenan, and Ladd at the very minimum. I think you could compare him to the running backs that are at the tier above. Jalen McMillan will be our next option. He's my bet to be the wide receiver 1 for Baker Mayfield going into the future, but there's nothing that guarantees that, right? So I definitely think I would rather bench all Bucs receivers until we actually get confirmation this week. Jerry Jeudy will be our next name. If you are looking at Jeudy, he's an every down player with no Amari. This past week, 95% of the snaps, which is a season high. And you have Jameis as well, so you should potentially have more passing volume here too. Dontavian Wicks, maybe get lucky and get a touchdown. He only played 41% of the snaps this past week. Michael Pittman, I'm making this ranking under the assumption that Josh Downs is playing, where Pittman's only had 10 targets for the past 2 weeks. Anthony Richardson has looked god-awful. Zach Moss will be our next name if you're looking at Moss. Seems like you actually do just have, Chase Brown taking over as the starter and Moss maybe turning into just premium handcuff. Hopkins will be much higher in our rankings in the future. Just this first weekend here, like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if he only plays 30% of the snaps. And then Raheem Mostert, I felt like we needed to talk about him just a bit. Definitely don't drop him just yet. With Tua coming back in, this offense may improve and maybe get some goal line usage, but obviously no receiving usage. So you're only hunting those touchdowns. But I think that's all I got for you. I really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. If I was, hit that like, subscribe if you play fantasy football. And of course, if you wanted to take advantage of the free Malik Neighbors pick that we got you set up with, and on top of that, get a free Dak Prescott pick if you are new to Underdog Fantasy. You're only going to get both those if you use code FLOCK. You'll also get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. You'll also get a free team review in the live stream that we are doing every single night. Just go through the link in the description, go through the link in the comment section, and use promo code FLOCK. But I think that's all I got for you. I really do appreciate you and really hope we get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.